Hello and welcome to another episode of Stratola Spectrum. I'm your host, Dinesh Chandrasekhar, Chief Analyst and founder of Stratola. In this episode, we will be talking to Kim Manus, who is the Corporate Vice President of Microsoft Fabric product. She has been with Microsoft for more than 14 years, starting her career on the product management side with companies like Zulily and Frontdesk. She joined Microsoft as a senior product manager for the Power BI division. Her rise in ranks over the years to being the top dog of all things Microsoft Fabric is as stupendous as her amazing no teleprompter keynotes she delivers at all the major events. Today, we will dig a little deeper into the human side of AI adoption with Kim. Please join me in welcoming Kim Manus to the show. So, Kim, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. This is gonna be fun.
Appreciate it. So let me just set the context here. I want to say by introducing to our audience about what we're going to be talking about today. And the context here is that every major data platform shift that has happened over the last 2 or 3 decades is remembered mostly for the technology that actually enabled it. The real story, though, is always about authority, interpretation, and judgment. When self-service analytics, for example, emerged, the headline was dashboards, dashboards. The deeper change, though, was that business users were suddenly trusted to ask and answer their own questions, and
Yeah.
IT had to adapt to that loss of control. AI feels kind of similar, but also
Yeah.
fundamentally different, because AI just doesn't democratize access to data. It forces organizations to confront something that I think they've been avoiding for decades, which is never fully agreeing on meaning, the ontology, the context of like how we name and phrase things and all that. We have so much data, we have like access to unlimited compute, we have uh, powerful models, yet something simple like what we spoke about yesterday, like top customers by revenue, still collapses into a debate about like, which customers are we talking about, which fiscal year or calendar year are we talking about, which region, blah, blah, blah. So it suddenly goes into this debate about semantics of what actually that particular phrase means.
Yeah.
So I think what AI exposes here is not just like a modeling problem, but it's an organizational one. And that's the context that I want to set up with that by saying context, whether it be definitions, assumptions, intent, policy, everything was always about being human. It was with us and it was implicit, almost like fragmented, but implicit. And now, as AI systems move from experimentation to production this year, that implicit knowledge suddenly becomes kind of like almost the deciding limiting factor in a way, right? So the real question for enterprise leaders then aren't about like tools or architectures, but it's about like where human judgment belongs, how it gets encoded, how governance evolves without like suffocating or stifling innovation, right? So Kim, you've had a very unique vantage point across multiple such data inflection points, and I want to explore what AI is actually forcing enterprises to reckon with, right? Beyond the noise, beyond the tooling. So maybe the first order of business to like get to is with every data revolution that has happened, which is there are claims to be unprecedented and all that. From your perspective, what is the structural difference between this AI moment that we are living in and prior platform shifts that you've seen? Not in terms of
Yeah.
capability, but in terms of consequences.
Yeah, you make a really good point because the technology is going to evolve over time, but so much of these problems and these platform shifts are inherently human problems, right? It's what does the job look like in this new world and how does it change and how do we work together? How do we collaborate across a company, right? And if you look, I've been in the Power BI space now for the last 10 years, right? And if you think about 10 years ago, that shift we really made with self-serve analytics, at the time there was so much resistance to this idea of a business user asking and answering their own question,
Hmm.
right? And at the time, the business would have to file a ticket with IT and IT would go build a dashboard and a few months later it would come out. And then if you wanted to change, you'd have to file another ticket. And it was just this slow process. And then self-service analytics came along and it's unheard of today for a business user to not be able to download Power BI or a similar tool and just do it themselves, right? And with that shift came this shift in dynamics between the humans involved in an
Hmm.
organization, right? The job of IT became less about, I'm going to build you the dashboard, and more about, I'm going to enable you, right? I'm going to add the right guardrails to make sure the governance is clear and, you're doing the right things with the data. I'm going to be able to, maintain compliance, all of that stuff. But it became about enablement, right? As opposed to doing the work so that they could get out of the way and let business users ask and answer their own questions, right? And I think that same transition is happening right now with AI, where there is no question that AI is changing how we work, right? We're past that question at this point.
Yeah.
So now it becomes again about how do we enable the business to go as fast as possible? Because again, as we've learned in the BI space, the business will find a way. They will find the easiest path, the fastest path. And for the, IT side of the world, IT needs to make sure that it's governed, it's secure, it's, that we're not leaking data and everything is trustworthy, right? So that dynamic, it honestly feels very, very similar. That we're really empowering business with more and more capabilities than we ever have before. And we need to figure out how to say yes to those business users safely.
Yeah. So maybe a related question there then is, if self-service analytics was redistributing access to data, what do you think is AI redistributing and from whom?
I think, the way I talk about the data space is it's a spectrum, right? If you think about on the lowest end of the spectrum, you have somebody who just wants the number. Just give me the
Hmm.
number and go out, right? And maybe then you have somebody who will open a dashboard and slice and dice and cross highlight. And then you'll have somebody who maybe will build the dashboard themselves. And you kind of go up and up the spectrum. Okay, maybe you'll write advanced semantic model queries. Maybe you'll build a Python notebook to do some analysis all the way to I'm going to build an app, an iOS app, right? And so on. And the way I think about AI is it's just shifting us all up that spectrum, right? It's just making everything easier than it was before. Um, and that I think is really the difference right now with AI, that it's moving us all up the spectrum and real quickly, right?
So there is data access, which we have talked about, democratizing data access. And then there is like analytics access, which is interpreting what the data actually means and what it means to my part of the business and all
Yeah,
that. And then I also touched on this ambiguity portion, organizational ambiguity of,
yeah,
how to interpret things and all that. So I think over time, we have seen better tools have always compensated for organizational ambiguity, right? But do you think AI is kind of doing the opposite, like by amplifying the ambiguity instead of like masking it?
totally. And you and I were talking about this. It's like if I hired the best data expert that knew all the tools and brought them into my organization, and I said, "Tell me the top 10 customers by revenue for the last year." The data expert would turn to me and say, "Fiscal year or calendar year? Which customer column should I use? How do you calculate revenue?" And AI exposes that context gap, right, that we have. And again, when I think about how our careers are going to evolve and how the data space is going to evolve into the kind of work we're all going to do, it's about making sure we get clarity on that context and we put it into the system so AI can make that decision.
Hmm.
Because, today, okay, maybe we paper over some of that lack of context, right? Like, but you still see it. You see it when finance has a different number than sales, when we're talking about our revenue line item. You see those arguments in organizations. Today, maybe they're not as encoded in the code, right? And it's more of in a meeting we argue about whose number is right. But as people start really depending on AI and moving really quickly with AI, if we don't fix this, if we don't get that context for the organization centralized and agreed upon, like AI is just not going to solve the problems we need it to solve, right?
I think that's a great way to phrase it. And I feel like, enterprises keep discovering that, AI systems fail on these basic questions unless like, humans intervene with this kind of context and all that. And I love it that you said like, you have to like be able to centralize it. But is this best understood as a data quality problem, a semantic problem, or is it a failure of shared institutional understanding?
I think it's a combination of things, right? And when we look at, how we're doing this in Fabric, right? And how we're taking this approach with Fabric IQ, right? We really see it as these kind of three layers, right? The first is you have to centralize the data. You have to have access to all the data. If you have gaps, if you have silos, like again, similar to a human, if you don't give them access to the data they need to make the decision, they won't be able to. So making sure you centralize the data, and really in Fabric we're doing that with OneLake, and we're making it trivial to bring the data wherever it's coming from, whether it's cloud, whether it's on-prem, whether it's some SaaS product or clouds outside of Microsoft, right? We want the data all to be in one place. And then that next layer, like you said, it's that getting the semantic definition down and getting it agreed upon, right? And today in Power BI, we've got 20 million plus semantic models out there.
Mm,
And these semantic models are the mechanism in which all of our 30 million plus Power BI users have built their Power BI reports.
mm,
So the cool thing here is a lot of business users have already done this work, right? They've already given these definitions in service of building a report, right? Because they need to have a chart that has the revenue line item, and so they've built this revenue measure. Turns out that revenue measure can be used by AI as the definition. So again, now we have already many business users have already started putting in those semantics. And then it comes to how do you elevate that even further, right? And at an organizational level, back to the, I have a revenue item, revenue line item, you have a revenue line item. How do we explain to the system how these things relate to one another, right?
mm,
And
mm.
when to use what, and which one wins if there's a conflict. And that's really where Fabric IQ and our concepts of ontologies now in Fabric uh, really help bring all these things together so you can basically build a digital twin of your business, right? You can tell the system, this is how our business operates. When we're talking about, reporting on earnings, we use the finance numbers. But
Right.
when we're talking about understanding products usage, we use the telemetry from the product, right? And here's when and where they should, align, and when and where they should diverge. So it's all about kind of bringing together that context, and then again, helping the system tiebreak, right? And that's a uniquely human thing, right? That no one's going to know that besides the humans who know what business goals they need to solve, and the dynamics of those things.
Exactly. And I think what is most interesting about this episode is that in every single conversation that I've had in the past, it's always been about the technology. We've all spoken at length about how technology does this, that, and what it solves and all that. I think for the first time, we have taken a step back and said, where do humans actually matter and why this is so critical that we talk about this now to make sure that we have a successful AI implementation in the future. So I'm
Yeah.
glad we are having this conversation.
And
Um,
I'll say one of the things, I've loved to see over the years in the data space is just how much each of these platform shifts grows people's careers, right? And
mm,
there's so many people I've talked to over the years. Once I met a librarian who worked at a university, librarian in a university. She used Power BI to, categorize all the books in the library, and built a Power BI shop basically, to solve her problem. She
mm,
became head of BI at that university, right? She changed her career because of that university, because of Power BI and because of that job. And you just think like, how can we take people who are business users, then analysts, then they become data engineers, eventually can we make all these folks back-end engineers with all the technology we have? So the upside, I think, we talk a lot about in the market, everybody talks a lot about being afraid of AI taking our jobs, but think about the job opportunity that comes from new skill sets
right,
that AI brings.
right. So at an individual level, I totally get it, right? So if I were that librarian and I started using Power BI and I love the tool and I love how easy life suddenly became because of this tool, I would obviously gravitate more towards it and want to like further my skills and become the BI leader in that space. But as an organization, the way how you explained a data platform like Fabric and Fabric IQ enables you to like bring in these kinds of semantics together, resolve these kinds of conflicts of terminologies, make sure the semantics are like seamless across the enterprise and all that. what does it or how do we approach this problem from an organization perspective? Like, who is the owner for something like this? Have you seen success stories where there is a separate entity that says, here's how we start like implementing this across the organization and all that? How do we like bring all these different groups to come to consensus and say, here's our shared model, here's our semantic, here's how we interpret things and all that? When does
Yeah.
that start happening?
I think a lot of that happens with the rhythm of business,
Hmm.
right? And I'll give you a couple examples at Microsoft how we operate, right? Um, uh, Arun, my boss, he looks at our dashboard every day that's built in Power BI and it's all running on Fabric, and he's concerned with a couple things, right? He thinks about growth, he thinks about user satisfaction, he thinks about what's going on with our support, all of these topics, right? And those show up in the dashboard, but they also show up in our reviews with him, right? Where we argue about them, we talk about what we're going to do. And so that rhythm of business forces forces us to get real crisp on the numbers, right? And to
Hmm.
align on what's the number, who's watching the number. No, we're not using that number, we're using this number. Here's why, right? And I'll take it a level up, right? At Microsoft, we have a data set called MS Sales. It's what the entire field uses to run their business, right? Their compensation is queued off of this data set. So no one's confused about did I make a sale or not? It's that data set, right? And there's review again, there's rhythm of business with our leadership with, all the way up to the top, all using that centralized data set. And so it's not only the existence of the data and the curation of the data, but its use in daily practice, in rhythm of business, in conversations between people, right? And so some of this comes from the top and some of this comes from the bottom and some of it's departmental. And then sometimes departmentals need to duke it out and ladder up. So I think it's going to be both a top down and bottom up process to get there. But for the really important scenarios, like, yeah, how are we reporting earnings or how are we doing compensation? Those need to be solid and the semantics need to be super clear, right? And
Right.
people will spend the time on it. So for me, I think the thing I've seen success with is really integrating it into how decisions are made and the rhythm of business.
For a tech-savvy organization like Microsoft, I can see that happening.
Hmm.
I think we can all agree that that will be the natural way how that organization will evolve, how the participants will participate in this kind of an exercise to make sure that data is crystal clear, the semantics are like rock solid, nobody is like disagreeing on what the meaning or the interpretation of certain things are.
Yeah.
But when I talk to some of the community banks, credit unions, people like those, that
Hmm.
are smaller organizations that have like a little bit of a lag in terms of like technology adoption and all that, but are absolutely certain that AI is going to change the way how they do business, want to adopt it, but at the same
Yeah.
time, they have this inherent fear of like, sharing all this implicit knowledge, making it
Yeah.
more explicit. How do you or what do you advise to those organizations? How should they approach this problem? How should they solve it?
Yeah. I mean, I think always what I talk to customers about is picking a use case that is painful today
Hmm.
and really working through it, right? Because I think a lot of the doubts, um, you know, work through those objections, right? Work through those fears. And some of them, with broad data access comes risk, real risk, right? And so working through what is it exactly what are the risks that we're worried about? And let's go mitigate those one by one and be practical about it, right? And you don't have to start with the biggest, most complicated problem on day one, right? Pick a problem where we're constantly arguing about what's the right answer and what's the right number and where there's conflict and go pick that one and run it down. Because I think often we get into this like philosophical argument about AI when practically it's a tool, right? It's a tool like any other, and you need to figure out where it works in your organization and where it doesn't. And just getting your hands on keyboard and just trying it with something,
Yeah.
that's what I've seen success with both, in my own usage, and also just with customers.
Yeah. I mean, since we got philosophical, I'll ask you a philosophical
Yeah.
question as well. Do you believe that context like this can ever be fully formalized, or is there like an irreducible human layer that organizations must consciously preserve?
You know, I would say context is always going to evolve, right? Can you formalize some context? Like, let's take an example of building an AI agent and, we want to maximize profit, but we also want to maximize security,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, you always maximize security first because it's going to screw up your I mean, because you want to stay secure, but it's going to screw everything up, right? Security is most important. There are things like that you can just put that context in and there's no brainers, right? There's some things where there's no nuance. But the reality is there's so much nuance in how businesses work and how humans interact. And
Mm,
that's
mm,
why I think there's going to be this constant push-pull with the machines and humans to get that context to evolve over time. It's never going to be done in the same way. Again, back to if I hired a human and I gave them the entire brain dump of how our organization works,
mm.
tomorrow something new would happen, right? Some new context would come in because some outward market pressure, some customer feedback, something, our management team changed, right? Like organizations are constantly evolving. It's like evolution, right? And so we need to make sure that the system is really good at evolving that context with us. And
Yeah.
I've heard Satya say this a few times in terms of the using AI as like a bicycle for the mind, right? Like it
Mm.
just helps you go faster and it helps you like it's a tool, right? It's a tool, it's a machine to help you go faster. But still, that context of you and I having a conversation about something and agreeing that, oh, we should go in a different direction and here's why, that needs to be embedded in the system now.
Yeah. So if context becomes this first class concern, how does that change the way leaders think about data ownership and accountability?
It really comes back to again, with broad data access comes also accountability, who is making sure the data quality stays high, who is making sure the context stays updated. And it comes back to the basics of, this concept of data products, right? There's certain areas of the business you own, there's certain areas of the business I own, I'm responsible for those. And we interact with one another in certain ways, but you're the subject matter expert,
Right.
right? And I do think there's clear ways that we can create swim lanes. Again, just like if you had a bunch of humans in a team and you'd say, you own this area, please collaborate, come up with a plan. It's the exact same thing when it comes to AI and context, that there are going to be continued responsibilities for teams to make sure that uh, the right context is getting into the system and that it's getting up to date, it doesn't drift, that things aren't hallucinating, that the way we really think about the problem is what's in the system, right? And that it
Right.
doesn't still.
Right. Um, I think these conversations have been top of mind for almost everybody, given the market situation, how certain companies react to AI advancements or AI adoption, and then start thinking about their employee count and their growth
Yeah.
of, like, whether they need to hire in certain areas or not hire, or whether they need to like replace humans with AI and all that. So I think this is kind of like happening across the board. So the dominant narrative, yes, of course, is that AI definitely automate tasks, right? So no question
Yeah.
about that. But is it more, would you say that AI is like shifting more cognitive responsibility rather than eliminating layer? I think it's kind of going back to
Yeah.
your spectrum question, right? I mean, or the,
Yeah. I mean, with any platform shift, right? Like think about, the Industrial Revolution and think about, pre-industrial revolution, like, you know, people were working in farms all day and, picking produce out of the ground. Many of us are not doing that anymore, right? We're sitting at computers talking to each other online, right? And it's not that the jobs go away, but they
yeah,
change, right? The task changes. And I do think as the spectrum gets more and more blurry, as it gets easier to jump from one layer to the other in terms of capability,
right.
then and it becomes less of a question of how to do something, more what should I even do?
Mm,
Right? Like in
mm,
a world where we can build software like that, the question is how do we make sure that the software isn't just slop? that no one
Yeah.
wants to use, and that it's
Yeah.
all the same. So then it becomes a question of human judgment and taste and understanding why we need to build something and what we should build to solve what problem, which is honestly the fun part of the problem anyway, right? Like that's
Hmm.
the fun part of building software. Do I know exactly where the semicolon goes in the code? Like, oh, that's like debugging is the most annoying thing. Let the AI do that, right? And so then again, it comes back to this. Let's think about the context of the world we live in and what problem we need to solve.
Right. Stretching a little bit on that same human AI thing, I promise this is going to be one of the last few ones. Um, in an AI mediated data environment, which responsibilities do you think become more human? Is it like defining the intent of what we are supposed to be doing, or is it adjudicating the ambiguity that we spoke about, or
Mhm.
is it like resolving conflicts between like different types of metrics that the AI came up with, or is it governing outcomes? What area do
Wow.
you think?
Yes, all of those
All
things.
of the above.
Uh, what's going to be most, and maybe the way, it's an interesting way you frame it. Like maybe that those tasks are going to get divided up among people. Maybe it's going to be a mix of all of those things. Um, it's funny, my own usage of some of these tools and how I use them, right? Like today I was working on a mock-up for fabric for a product we're working on. And so I was using Figma Make is the AI tool to do the mock-ups. But I went into GitHub Copilot, and before I put the prompt into Figma Make, I went to GitHub Copilot and I went back and forth with it on just developing the prompt itself, right? Help me
Hmm.
develop a good prompt, right? And it develops the prompt, and I realized that's ambiguous, that's weird, that doesn't make sense. And just going back and forth, and even me being clear on what I'm trying to build, right? And me being able to articulate so clearly what is it that I want out of this thing. Um, it's hard, right? Like when
Hmm.
you get faced with that versus, again, sometimes, us humans talking to each other, we allow the ambiguity to exist a little bit. And when you're talking to a computer, there's no ambiguity. So I think a lot of the work and the shift we're all gonna have to make is
Hmm.
just being really good at being really precise on what we're trying to achieve,
Got
right?
it.
Um, so that's my take, but yes to all of your
All right.
suggestions there.
I mean, it's definitely something that I think we all need to understand that there's still a lot of handholding, a lot of stuff that we need to have that human in the loop in there. I don't think we are still in the fully autonomous era yet. We are getting there, but I think we still need to get these guardrails in place, these
Yeah,
foundational elements in place for us to get there. And without this, I think we are going to like definitely stumble and fall for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So, um, what risks do you see when organizations focus on efficiency gains, but they fail to redesign the roles around these new responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think the again, just I come back to my self-service BI experience and kind of
Hmm.
looking at that, right? Um, there's still a need for making sure we're doing this in a way that actually accrues value to the business, right? And back to, if you think about the role of IT and they went from, building reports to now governing, right? I think the same thing is going to apply here where, the role of these humans, the humans in the system, we have to govern the system, right? And we have to make sure it's doing the right things. And so it is with any platform shift, it comes this challenge of how do we train our people? How do we change our culture in our organization? And how do we help make the right decisions safely?
Mm.
And again, I think the business will find a way to solve the problem, right? Like we're all, we're going to optimize for the fastest way forward. And so making sure those guardrails are put in place on the governance side, making sure the enablement is set up, then you prevent real risk and you
Yeah.
prevent real sprawl and confusion, right? So, it's going to be a learning for all of us, I think, in this next year for sure, because it's coming. People are rolling out these agents and really, really moving into adoption. So,
Yeah, no, that's definitely my point of view as well, that I think 2025 we still kept playing and playing, and I think this is the year of impatience in my mind. CDOs and
Totally.
CIOs are gonna push their teams to like say put these into production. Let's see what happens. And of course, in that context or in the way the approach is done, governance is going to be kind of almost hindsight, which would be a sad thing.
Yeah.
I would love for organizations to start thinking about it more proactively rather than reactively about governance as
Totally.
AI moves into production, right?
Yeah.
Um, any guidance from your side, running Fabric, which has like built-in security, governance capabilities, and all that? What does a productive governance mindset actually look like? How do
Yeah.
you advise like CIOs and CDOs to think about 2026 when they start
Yeah.
like pushing these things into production?
When I think about governance, I think of two sides to the same coin,
Mm,
right? It's about enablement, right? And enablement with guardrails and with the right protections in place and being as proactive as you can. And then it's also about the reactive visibility, right? How do I make sure I know what's going on in the system, that I can react if there's something I missed with my guardrails? And then this continuous learning between the two. So that, okay, if you learn something new, you fix the guardrails, you fix the proactive approach. But really, like these two things shouldn't be opposed, right? There's this enablement. I want to make my business move as fast as possible, and I want to prevent risk, right? And those feel like completely opposing ideas of, hey, I'll just lock everything down. That'll prevent risk, right? But it really won't because, again, the business users, they'll find a way, they'll go around you, and that's even worse. So I really, really think that if you take this mindset of how do I enable it safely and how do I focus on saying yes with the right guardrails and then put the right observability in place underneath to make sure I know what's going on. I can confidently say, my security posture is applied and all that. Um, then, creativity will flourish.
very cool. I like that way you phrased it. Um, I see this, when I talk to like CISOs and certain CIOs who believe in locking down is kind of like the first approach, prevent access,
Yeah.
but it also stifles innovation. It also promotes like shadow AI to happen. Lots of different teams adopting like different tools, and there is no centralized understanding of what kind of tools are being used, how data is being shared across these different public and private AI tools. So
Yeah.
it just like makes governance even more of a nightmare than where they were like probably 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Um, I somehow feel like they are almost recreating the centralization that they worked decades to escape.
Yep. Right.
So that's kind of a unfortunate, sad thing. Awesome. So, maybe I'll ask you this. If you were advising a CIO, CDO today who's designing their AI strategy, where would you tell them to invest first? Is it data, models, people, or the institutional clarity that we had talked about as
Yeah.
well? Like, and
Yeah.
why? Right.
So unbiased, but
Yeah.
I do think the core of all this is the data,
Data.
right? The models are going to change, the tech is going to change. On the software front, we'll figure out better user experiences, we'll make it easier, we'll put in the right tooling for everybody on the AI front. That'll come, right?
Hmm.
And we see it every day. Just the models are getting better and better and better and better. But at the root of it is the data and the context, right? And making sure that you are operating off of that right data and that right context. Because again, you can have the best models in the world, the best software, even the best kind of organizational structure. But if you don't have clean data, right, garbage in, garbage out, you're
Yep.
you're not going to get the right results. So again, a biased perspective here, but I do think investment in data at the start and really coming up with a clear plan for how across the business and across multiple parts of your business, the data is going to be accessible to the people who need it and in the right format that you need it.
Yeah.
It's going to be critical.
Nice. Um, What is the hardest conversation enterprise leaders are still avoiding when it comes to AI?
Again, some of it comes down to the cultural shifts,
Hmm.
right? I think there's a lot of companies that sometimes you see them come in and they say, I got to do AI. My board's asking me this AI thing. My boss is yelling at me about this AI thing, right? Put some AI in the system so I can, make everybody happy. Um, but how it's going to fit into the business flow, I think that's the thing a lot of folks are ignoring, and how it's going to fit into the rhythm of business and how your team is going to change because of it, how the roles are going to shift. And I think we're all struggling with that right now because
Hmm.
the technology is changing so quickly. How should we use it, right? And some new capability comes out, and then we all say, "Oh my gosh, how do we do this? How do we fit this into our workflows?" And like you said, this last year has been a lot of tinkering and a lot of let's try it, let's play with it. Um, but really starting to rally around like here's the recommended best practice. Here's how we're going to do this in our organization and being clear. Because it's hard when, employees are being told use AI, but they don't know how, right? They haven't fitted into their workflow yet. So I think that's going to be again something as you talked about this next year putting it into production. We really got to figure out how.
Yeah. And in my opinion, again, I think one of the hardest conversations that I think enterprise leaders are still dancing around when it comes to AI is pure ROI. I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of investment going in, and I don't think there are enough clear metrics defined to help enterprise leaders understand what am I putting in, what does this even mean, how is this going to transform this, and what am I going to see in terms of like outcome,
Yeah.
positive outcome, obviously.
Yeah.
But the ROI conversation is like largely missing, and I think it goes back to like every single thing that you touched on as well. But yeah, I mean, these are like definitely interesting topics. But yeah, this is fantastic. And as I said, this is one of the first episodes that I've done where I think we have had like so much clarity and digging deep into the human element of AI, which I don't think we have done so much. So thank you so much for sharing all those insights. Maybe I'll ask you something lighter, given that we
Okay.
went like philosophical, deeper, and all kinds of directions. What is it that you as Kim, being like head of all things fabric at Microsoft, excited about the AI space for 2026?
Oh, I mean, it comes back to the human element, right? The thing I'm really excited about is seeing what our community builds with this, right? And for me, like, why have I stayed in this space as long as I have?
Hmm.
It's really rewarding for me to work on a product that we ship something and somebody gets promoted because of it, because they can now use that in a different way, or somebody
Hmm.
grows their business, excels in ways that they weren't able to before because now they have visibility into something they didn't have before. So I just think about all the ways that we can transform this product to make people's lives better, right? To make people get promoted, to grow people into a new function, a new job. Somebody can get a new job or start a new business simply because of the software we built. And that to me is really rewarding and fun. And I know we have a lot of things cooking for the next year. And it's going to make a real difference, I think, in people's careers and people's businesses. And for me, that is why I'm here.
Yeah, no, that's kind of exactly why you are in that job, I suppose,
Yeah.
helping the community, helping the people that use the software see that change in the way they do things every day. I think
Yeah.
that's a fabulous response. Kim, thank you so much for this conversation. I really loved it.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
This
much.
is really fun.